Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're focusing on Pfizer, a real giant in the pharma world, but one that's facing a pretty big moment. We're talking about the weight loss drug market, and it's absolutely exploding. And for you, our listeners, savvy investors tracking these big strategic shifts, this is really one to understand. So let's get into it.
Yeah, absolutely. The obesity market is just, well, it's a massive growth area. And Pfizer, they really need to make some moves here, especially after hitting a few bumps in the road with their own drug development.
Right, that recent news about danuglipron, that trial termination because of liver injury concerns. That must have hurt.
It definitely did. And, it wasn't the first time they'd hit a snag with that drug candidate either. They had earlier problems with a twice-daily version, mostly tolerability issues. And even before that, another candidate, lotiglipron, also ran into liver safety trouble. So it highlights how tricky this area is.
But the potential payoff is just enormous, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
We're looking at projections globally of maybe $100 billion, maybe even $200 billion for these obesity treatments.
It's staggering.
And right now it feels like Novo Nordisk with Wegovy and Eli Lilly with Zepbound, they really own the space with their injectables, those GLP-1s.
They certainly have the head start.
So our mission today really is to explore how likely it is that Pfizer tries to buy its way into this market, make a big acquisition to get a strong foothold, and what that could actually mean.
Yeah. The strategic pressure is definitely on. You look at their revenues from the COVID products, they're naturally coming down.
Sure.
So getting into a really high growth area like obesity is, it's pretty vital for their long-term picture. They reported, $13.7 billion revenue in Q1 2025. But this market isn't waiting. The competition's heating up fast. The forecasts are saying 16 new drugs could hit the market by 2029, potentially adding another $70 billion just to the GLP-1 part of it by 2031. Pfizer really risks getting left behind if they don't make a significant move.
It really feels like high stakes. I remember CEO Albert Bourla, after the COVID vaccine success, he specifically called out obesity as a key strategic pillar for Pfizer.
He did, which makes these recent drug development failures particularly challenging for that vision. So yeah, the acquisition path looks more and more likely, maybe even necessary.
Okay, so if they were to acquire who's potentially on the shopping list, there's been a lot of buzz around Viking Therapeutics, right? Especially after the danuglipron news.
Absolutely. Viking has been mentioned a lot. Their stock actually jumped, I think it was about 13%. Right after Pfizer's announcement.
Interesting.
And their main candidate, VK2735, it's a dual GLP-1 GIP agonist. What's really interesting here is they're developing it as both an injection, subcutaneous, and an oral pill.
Having both options seems like a smart play. How's the data looking?
Pretty impressive, actually. The injectable version in phase 2 showed weight loss up to nearly 15%, 14.7% after just 13 weeks.
13 weeks? That's fast.
It is. And importantly for investors watching this, the difference compared to baseline and placebo was significant right from week 1. Suggests it kicks in quickly.
Okay. And the oral version?
Also showing promise. Phase 1 results look good. Weight loss up to 8.2% by day 28. And that seemed to hold up at follow-up. An oral option could be a major competitive advantage, obviously much more convenient for many patients than injections.
So where are they in the development process? Sounds like things are moving along.
They are. Phase 3 for the injectable VK2735 is expected to start Q2 2025. And the phase 2 trial for the oral, the venture trial, that's fully enrolled now. We should see data from that in the second half of this year, 2025.
And financially, can they sustain this development pace?
They seem pretty solid for now, reported about $852 million in cash at the end of March 2025. And they've also got a manufacturing deal lined up with Corton Pharma, which is important for scaling up if things go well.
Okay, so from Pfizer's perspective, what's the potential price tag?
Well, Viking's market cap is currently around, say, $2.9 billion, which, okay, it's a lot of money, but it's actually down from where it peaked earlier.
Right.
So for a company Pfizer's size, maybe it's an attractive entry point, especially given their M&A talk.
Yeah.
And don't forget, Viking isn't just obesity. They also have VK2809, which targets NAH, that's a serious liver disease.
Ah, the non-alcoholic steatohepatitis. Yeah, that's another huge potential market down the line.
Exactly. So there's some pipeline diversity there, too.
Okay, so Viking is definitely one to watch. Who else is potentially in the mix? I've seen Altimmune mentioned as well.
Yes, Altimmune is another interesting one. Their lead candidate is pemvidutide, or ALT-801. It's also a dual agonist, but this one targets GLP-1 and glucagon receptors.
Okay, slightly different mechanism. How are their results?
Also quite strong. Their phase 2 momentum trial, at 48 weeks showed mean weight loss between about 10% and nearly 16% across different doses, significantly better than the 2.2% seen with placebo.
Impressive numbers. Is there anything that makes pemvidutide stand out specifically?
There is, actually. It's potentially about how people lose the weight. The data suggests much better preservation of lean muscle mass.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, according to their data, only about 22% of the weight lost was lean mass at week 48. That compares pretty favorably to some other drugs in the class, where lean mass loss can be, up to 40% or even more over longer periods.
That could be a really significant differentiator for patients and doctors preserving muscle during weight loss.
Absolutely. Altimmune's CEO has definitely highlighted this, even using terms like best-in-class potential for lean mass preservation.
And where are they with development? Have they talked to the FDA?
They have. They successfully completed their end-of-phase 2 meeting with the FDA and have agreed on the plan for their phase 3 program. It looks like 4 large trials, about 5,000 people total, each running for 60 weeks.
So they're moving towards the final stage. What about their financial situation compared to Viking?
It appears a bit tighter. Reports suggest their cash runway is around $150 million. So definitely less robust than Viking's $850 million plus high. That difference could certainly play into Pfizer's thinking, maybe affecting timing or deal structure if they were interested.
Okay, so comparing the two head-to-head. Viking has the dual subcutaneous oral approach for VK2735 plus the NASH angle. Altimmune's pemvidutide has this potentially class-leading lean mass preservation story.
That sums it up pretty well. Different strengths. And then there's the valuation piece. Viking's roughly $3 billion market cap. Altimmune's likely lower, maybe making it seem on the surface more affordable.
But affordability isn't the only factor, is it? Pfizer has a pretty hefty M&A budget earmarked for 2025, I believe.
Right. The numbers floating around are usually in the $10 to $15 billion range for business development this year. So Viking's price tag, while substantial, probably fits within that capacity. Some analysts are even throwing out numbers like $100 per share as a potential takeover price for Viking. Likely less, maybe somewhere around $40 per share has been suggested by some analysts. But, analyst sentiment right now seems maybe slightly tilted towards Viking as the more probable target for Pfizer, perhaps because it offers that faster path back into the obesity game with potentially leading assets. BO Capital Markets, for instance, thinks Pfizer is quite keen to do a deal.
Makes sense. Okay, let's talk about Pfizer's overall financial muscle. They're huge, market cap over $135 billion as of late April. Q1 was solid. They can afford a big deal, right?
They certainly have the scale, but it's not quite unlimited funds. We need to remember their debt situation.
Ah, right. There's some significant debt coming due soon.
Yeah, about $12 billion needs to be paid back or refinanced by the end of 2025, and then another $6 billion in 2026. So that has to factor into their calculations when they're thinking about spending billions on an acquisition.
Still, Pfizer has a long history of growing through big acquisitions, doesn't it? Warner Lambert, Pharmacia, Wyeth, Hospira, and most recently, that massive Seagen deal.
Exactly. M&A is deeply embedded in their corporate DNA, and they explicitly stated in their Q1 results that they maintain flexibility to pursue value-creating business development transactions. So the door is definitely open.
And it's not just buyouts, right? They're also doing partnerships?
Correct. They recently announced collaborations, like with Flagship Pioneering and Profound Therapeutics, specifically aimed at discovering new obesity drug candidates. It shows they're attacking this from multiple angles, not just waiting to buy a late-stage asset. It's all happening amidst what some are calling a broader M&A supercycle in pharma.
Okay, so besides Viking and Altimmune, are there other, maybe slightly less talked about potential targets Pfizer might be looking at?
Oh, definitely. The field is quite rich. You've got Zealand Pharma, for example. They have Survatide, another dual GLP-1 glucagon agonist, partnered with Boehringer Ingelheim. Showed really strong phase 2 data, like 19% weight loss at 46 weeks. Phase 3 should start this year.
Okay, another strong contender.
Then there's Structure Therapeutics. They're working on an oral GLP-1 agonist, GSBR 1290. Phase II showed about 6% weight loss in 12 weeks. Oral is always attractive. Their market cap is smaller, too, around $1.5 billion.
Convenience factor again. Anyone else?
Terns Pharmaceuticals also has an oral GLP-1, Terns 601. Phase showed pretty rapid results, like 5.5% weight loss in just 28 days. They've got decent cash, too.
Interesting.
Maybe even a bit more speculative, a private company like Ressalis Therapeutics. They have a totally different approach, a microRNA inhibitor aiming to reduce fat but keep lean mass. It's preclinical, so much higher risk, but potentially lower cost up front.
So a range of options from late stage to very early. And you mentioned Zealand's partnership with Boehringer Ingelheim. Could Pfizer try to get involved there somehow, like a licensing deal?
It's not out of the question. Deals can get complex. Pfizer might try to negotiate some kind of co-development or regional licensing rights for survodutide, perhaps.
Yeah.
Lots of possibilities.
So putting it all together for Pfizer, they have this $10–15 billion M&A war chest, but they also have debt maturing. How do they balance that?
It's a balancing act for sure. They might not just go for one big splash. Maybe a tiered approach. Acquire a mid-stage asset like a Viking or Altimmune perhaps, but also place smaller bets on earlier stage science, like through those partnerships we mentioned.
And what about their own pipeline? Do they have anything left in obesity?
They do have one asset still in phase 2, PF07976016.
Huh.
It's an oral GIP antagonist, not a GLP-1.
Okay.
So one potential strategy could be to acquire a GLP-1 agonist, maybe an oral one, and then explore combining it with their own GIP antagonist down the road. Combination therapies are likely the future in this space anyway.
That makes sense. And the focus on oral candidates seems smart, given market trends.
Definitely aligns with patient preference and potentially broader market access. But, the clock is ticking. Amgen and Maritide looking promising. Roche is pushing forward with their own oral GLP-1. The competitive landscape is not standing still. Pfizer needs to move relatively quickly to catch up.
And the bar is high, right? Novo and Lilly aren't resting either. They have next-generation drugs in development, too.
Exactly. Whatever Pfizer brings in, it needs to be truly competitive, not just a me-too product.
Okay, let's shift to the bottom line for investors. What could a successful acquisition actually mean for Pfizer's revenue and stock price? Remind us where their revenue comes from now.
Right now, 2024 revenue was driven by blockbusters like Eliquis, Vyndaqel, their oncology portfolio, but zero contribution from a major obesity drug. Looking ahead, say, to 2030, if Pfizer managed to capture even, let's say, a conservative 5% slice of that massive GLP-1 market, that could easily translate into billions of dollars in new annual revenue. If they got 10% or 15%, you're talking very significant numbers, potentially helping to fill the gap from declining COVID revenues and upcoming patent expirations.
And what about the specific drugs we discussed? What are the peak sales projections for something like Viking's or Altimmune's candidates?
Analyst estimates vary, of course, but for Viking's VK2735, you see projections potentially in the $8 to $12 billion peak annual sales range if it hits the mark.
Wow, that's huge.
For Altimmune's pemvidutide, maybe more in the $3 to $5 billion range. Structure's oral GSBR 1290, perhaps $4 to $6 billion. But remember, these are years away, pending successful phase 3 trials and approvals.
Right, hurdles still to clear. But if they do make a successful acquisition, what could that do for Pfizer's stock? Could it be a major catalyst?
It absolutely could. We saw what happened with Eli Lilly's stock, largely driven by excitement around Mounjaro and Zepbound.
True.
Successfully entering the obesity market would signal pipeline diversification, capture a share of a huge growth market, and could lead investors to give Pfizer a higher valuation multiple. It addresses a key concern about their future growth drivers.
But acquisitions aren't risk-free, are they?
Not at all. There are always integration risks. Look at the complexities, even with the Seagen deal. Clinical trials for acquired assets can still fail. That's a constant risk in biotech. And there's increasing pricing pressure on drugs, especially with things like the IRA reforms in the U.S.
So it's not a guaranteed win.
No guarantees. But strategically, making a smart move in obesity seems critical for Pfizer's long-term narrative. It could deliver really significant revenue growth by 2030, potentially offsetting those other pressures, and really act as the catalyst needed to get the stock moving again in the long run.
It really feels like a pivotal moment for Pfizer then. The stakes in this weight loss market are incredibly high.
They really are. And as we've discussed, there are several ways they could try to jump in through an acquisition. Viking and Altimmune seem like the most prominent names right now, but there are other interesting players too. A successful deal here could fundamentally reshape Pfizer's growth trajectory and, consequently, how investors view the company and its stock.
Absolutely. A space we'll be watching very closely. And if you, our listeners, found this deep dive helpful, please do subscribe to Stock Explorers for more analysis like this.
Yeah, definitely hit subscribe.
Give this discussion a like if it was valuable, and make sure you turn on notifications so you catch our future episodes. Thanks so much for tuning in today.